Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Playtest panel. And today, we are a panel of four with our special guest, Justin, joining us today. Welcome. I guess to start off, do you want to introduce yourself, tell the viewers or listeners who you are, and then we usually do an update afterwards, but I think first and foremost, introduce yourself and let us know what you're all about.
So my name is Justin. I'm the owner of Total Game Development, so a Melbourne-based studio. There's my wife, so just come through. She just finished work. Classic indie. But yes, I'm the owner of Total Game Development, and we have quite a few projects working on, but our flagship project is Wall of Salvation. So it's an RTS game. But yes, we have some other projects that we're talking about. Some of them have also started development. So yeah, I'm more than happy to talk about these.
One thing that we do, I guess, now as tradition is because we're all friends here, we like to give updates on what we've worked on this week. Because for me, I'm working on my own solo project. I know Blake has been blazing through his current... I don't know. We're all excited for Blake because he's been stagnant for so many years. Now he's actually doing something. We're like, thank goodness. And then Andrew's always, what isn't he doing? He's not working at a company. He's making his own thing or whatever hustle. So I'm curious to see what everyone has done this week.
First of all, I point out I haven't been stagnant for all this time. I've been making a lot of stuff, just not finishing anything. But this project, I think I'm going to get it done. It's going well. So last time we spoke on the podcast, I was about to start work on the hotel map of the game, and that I wasn't very happy with the results of that map. It started to just feel like the back rooms basically. So I scrapped that and made a subway map in about 3 days, and that turned out really good. So I now have 3 maps in the game. And then after that, I sort of just moved on to really sort of improving the progression of the game and how different, the different ways that you can approach the levels. So it, will sort of randomly choose how many enemies are in the map, how many or what type of enemies there are, how difficult it is. And I've added optional objectives. So now I basically have the entire sort of gameplay loop is basically in the game. It's essentially a tiny little demo at this point, and now I'm really just polishing it as much as I can because I have about a month now until Games Week in Melbourne. So I'm really just pushing to just try and get that as polished and good as I possibly can before I can start showing it to an audience, potential investors maybe, but we'll see what happens.
So it's been a lot of progress I've seen Blake doing over the last 2 weeks. That subway level is coming along really nicely. And did you decide to change out sort of the core gameplay during that last 2 weeks, or did we discuss that last episode?
I think that might have been just before the last episode. I'd sort of moved away from the sort of some of the more stealth aspects of the game, which I really liked, but it made making the game replayable very difficult. So at the moment it is a bit more arena based, which I'm not trying to make an arena shooter, but that's sort of where the game's at the moment. It's very much enemies spawn in and you sort of have to take them out rather than, learning their routes and where they are and sneaking up. So I'm sort of at the moment trying to find a middle ground between the two because I don't really like the arena approach that I have in the game, but it's just sort of figuring out how I can make the game replayable with some of those stealth elements still in.
It's a really tough when you have to completely change sort of your entire sort of game design or also core gameplay loop to sort of fit it. I think you're starting to get it though. I've seen a lot of progress on that, and hopefully within the next month we can do a playtest on this episode, right?
I'm hoping so. Maybe for the Games Week demo, if we can play that on the podcast right before, or maybe even during Games Week when we do an in-person episode.
Yeah, that'd be really fun. Ooh. I like that idea.
but no promises. I still got a lot of work to do. But
All empty promises. Nothing could happen in Games Week, but we never know. Andrew, what have you been working on?
I mean, I've been working on a lot of things. In the last few weeks, my contract has ended, so I've sort of moved on to more personal projects. But last week we went to GamesPond, which was really cool event. We showed off this new sort of like prototype that we were working on that I sort of rushed out because I kind of like sort of mulled on it when it came to the animations. I had to kind of rush on it and cancel a week of my video. But I mean, it was received really well. A game that was very bare bones, just sort of like a tech demo where you go into a dungeon and you sort of kill monsters, and then like you sell these items at a convenience store. But at the moment it was just sort of like just a single room and just endless like enemies spawning at you as they're really easy. But people still really enjoyed that. What was basically like 30 seconds of gameplay, people were like playing for like 5-10 minutes. I don't know why. I guess it just felt nice to play, but people enjoyed it, and I had a really good time at GamesPond.
GamesPond, for those who don't know, it's an industry event we have, and the aim is kind of to have indies talk with more. I mean, would you say investors or just more industry folk? I guess to like get more connections. Because I volunteered at it, and it was an awesome experience. It was actually one that I think like. Going into it, I thought I'll be kind of okay, but the turnout was really good, and just the energy, I think, was actually it was very akin to a usual Games Week that we have in October. Like, it was that same vibe that you get with everyone just being there, loving games. It was more relaxed, I feel, because it obviously wasn't that like week-long stress of every event. I had a great time. It was really fun. And I mean, I got to play your game, Andrew, and it's very interesting seeing you guys as a studio like bring out new games and see what ideas you're cooking and kind of get that like initial feedback of like, okay, how is this going to change? Because I know the style of games you guys make, because you've done so many Game Jam games. I know that you guys actually are very good at getting like fun gameplay loops. I remember the Global Game Jam that we both went to, like that game. I remember like within the first day, I was like, man, they've already got their loop down. Like, it's already so fun and engaging. And so this one I was very curious to see, because like you said, it was a tech demo. Like, half the game actually wasn't even there. It was all smoke and mirrors. It was just combat. And even then I was like, okay, I can see where this is going. So it was just curious to see that. And also the other games that were there as well. Like, there were heaps, and we had like other friends that were showcasing their game and getting feedback from people who like we know industry wide are like people that you kind of they're a bit of a big deal. It was just cool to see conversations and like people what's a non-gross way of saying, like cross-pollinating like networks in a way that was like really interesting to see. There's lots of cool people I got to meet. There was like one guy I met, he went there just to support his friend, but he is a freelance map artist. He will just draw maps for people's fantasy books, for D&D campaigns, and we just talked about like that for like 45 minutes, and it was so interesting to get like this whole different perspective, like this niche. He's like, yeah, I've been drawing maps for like 5 years now. I don't know how to draw like people anymore, because he hasn't drawn a person in so long. And we're talking about like because he's a writer as well, whether he ever wanted to make games and what type of game he would want to make and that sort of thing. Talked to some other computer science people, which is really cool. Got like a really good chat with some senior engineers who just like laid it on me on how the industry is. So I feel more prepped. They didn't scare me away. But the coolest chat I got to have was with Josh Wire, who he was the lead on Portal 2. And just talking with him about stuff. It was a very surreal experience. And it's funny, they did photos for the event, and me and Andrew were looking the other night at all the pictures, and there's like no photos of Andrew. Like, there's maybe like people covering his face. You could tell it's him because of his hair. And there's one of me, and they got my side profile, which is the most like unattractive profile, holding a Coke, and then you got my belly out there. Andrew's like, "Oh, Nathan, it's fine. You look normal." I was like, "Andrew, you don't know how beautiful I used to be when I was younger." But yeah, it was just really good to have that event, and I think it's definitely one I want to go back to next year and following years, just because of how I think the timing was perfect. Like, it was late August. It was a good size. The catering was awesome, and it was just like a really fun night, and it felt like a very worthwhile networking event. So if you're in Melbourne, look out for Games Pond because I think it's one that you should definitely go to. And if you're working on something, like going and showcasing would be amazing.
Yeah, I've never heard of them until tonight, so this is fantastic. And I've been working on my game for quite a few years now, and I feel like I've been living under a rock for most of that time. And until I've really just gone public since early this year, now I'm starting to get exposed to these things. So it's really fantastic to hear about these events. And unfortunately, because I am in Melbourne as well, I do get exposed to these things. But yeah, I just for the longest time, I've just been, coding away pretty much on my own. And I can talk a little bit more, more recent developments. But yeah, it's fantastic to hear about all this.
Yeah, Justin, I mean, if you wanted to go ahead and start talking about, like, because I know obviously you got your main project that you are working on. I mean, I'm also curious just to kind of go with how the company is set up, like your game studio is set up, and kind of like what your goals are in terms of like what games you want to make and that sort of thing. So, like, feel free to have the floor
Yeah,
and just kind of like tell us, what do you do?
sure. So I think I might start with the business first of all. So I formed it. It's about a year old now, and it. I mean, I always wanted to do it, and I've done some business ventures in the past, but this one's really felt like a proper shot at it. So, um, so I've worked as an educator at my university for probably about 6 years now. And then recently I got another job where I still do that as a software developer. So fortunately, I've been in the financial capability of starting a business. And because I meet a lot of students, and a lot of students are also very interested in game development, because I deal with a lot of computer scientists, and like half of them are interested in game development. And so I was just speaking to a few students, and I said, okay, well, maybe we could start a business together. Now, I still lead the business. I'm in the sole trading position, but I wanted them to work with me with all different aspects. So during the uni months, they work with me as volunteers. And then during the summer months, I do actually offer a summer internship just to make things a little bit easier. It's not glamorous. It's what I can do. But I'm very much interested in bridging the gap between undergrads and possibly getting themselves into the game industry. I think that's really missing quite a bit. Um, and I think even just IT in general, I think is a lot of times it's difficult for graduates to find work. So if there's anything that I can do to facilitate that, then I'm more than happy to do it. And then of course, I've been playing games since I think I started like when I was 6, playing. So yeah, never really gave up the passion. But I probably these days actually I do a lot more development than actually playing games because I'm super busy with things. Um, but yeah, I've been working on this RTS game. All right, I will say that when I started, so it was 2017. Um, and it's funny because I think it was the last episode you were talking about burnout, um, and how quickly sometimes, even after a few months, I'm like on the opposite end of the spectrum. I like even working on it for as many years as I have, any free moment, I just sit down and work on it. So, um, I don't know. I kind of think of it a little bit like speed running, where most of the time it's just the same thing. You're just loading up and doing that repeating of game loop again and again and again, and then occasionally you'll do like a PB or something, and you'll get something to work, and then hopefully one day you'll reach that world record. So especially for me, because I tend to develop my games from scratch. So Wall of Salvation, which is our RTS game, is entirely written in JavaScript. But we use a few libraries as well. So Pixie.js is the one that actually taps into the graphics cards. Um, Hoyler, I think it is, or Hyler JS is our sound library. but there's a whole bunch of other ones, and then there's also a lot of custom libraries that I tend to write up. Last time I checked, I think it's around 46,000 lines of code for the game itself. But yeah, there's humongous advantages of doing it this way. You have full control over the engine, and of course, if anything goes wrong, it's your fault. So yeah, but yeah, it's a daunting task. But I think for me, going down this path is really important to learn about how to program. I literally actually have a programming language built into the game as well. So you can write hello world, you can write for loops, you can write if statements, you can do that. And so I did that last year, and I really learned about how does, like, for example, programming languages work. Like, how does a parser work? How does an abstract syntax tree work? How does a tokenizer work? And so, yeah, spent a few months doing that. And then eventually, yeah, got it into the game. And so, yeah, you can write little scripts, which actually, in some cases, manipulate the game itself. So, for example, you can turn on a shader through programming. And so, yeah, so there's lots of little bits and bops that are in it. And it's, like I said, I can't get enough of it. I don't know if I'll burn out. Yeah.
It's interesting because you were talking earlier on about like working with students. I'm curious to know how they start and kind of things you see lacking in them and what you really try to instill in them by the end of, whatever time frame they have when you work with them.
Yeah. So I have 5 students working for me at the moment. 2 of them are designers, and the other 3 are programmers. One thing that I've tried to do is try not to get them to start from scratch. So, for instance, my one of my programmers, we have a project where we are porting the web version of the RTS into a desktop version, and that's written in C++. And that's very much, I'm intending it for the JavaScript to be a guideline of how the code is meant to be. So a lot of the logic and challenges have actually already been solved by myself. And despite all that, it's still challenging to port from one language to the next, because that project is not necessarily about porting from one, say, language to another. We're also changing the architecture as well. So in RTS games, and actually I think you were also talking about different customizations with your games, we wanted to be make a C++ engine where you can quickly and rapidly prototype different units within maybe, hopefully, a few minutes. So if you can just provide your artwork, change a little bit of the game logic, and then it goes into game pretty much straight away. So, and that's quite different from my JavaScript version, where I can kind of take some of the shortcuts and say, okay, yep, I still try to do good practices because, as I said, it's quite a large code base for an individual. But as I said, I can also take some shortcuts. But when I and they work on the C++ version, where we have this kind of unique architecture, we have to be very careful on how we think about it. Do we always get it right? No, there's definitely things that we have to go back and redesign. But yeah, so that's one of the instances. I would say also, especially during the uni months, you have to be very patient, unless there's deadlines coming up. But for the most part, I say to my students, you're not on a timeline. We only really have soft deadlines. If you need to tell me, like, okay, you've got, like, for instance, I got one design student, she told me this semester she had 9 assignments. And I'm like flabbergasted, because I mean, obviously I've gone through undergrad. In fact, I went through it twice. I've got 2 degrees. And I'm like, I was never that busy in one semester. And so, yeah, she was telling me that, yeah, I've got all this work to do. And I said, it's okay. And I was actually last night doing a pamphlet for PAX for coming up. Really, I was thinking my design student should work on it, but I just knew she was too busy. So I just found a template, and after about 3 hours, I was basically finished. And so, yeah, you have to be quite patient. During the summer months, it's a little bit more different. I'm a little bit more strict. but I also think, they're here to learn. And they're not, I would consider to be full employees. I'm not working them full time. And so, yeah, I have to be, in my mind, a little bit more loose. When I'm working my jobs, um, the responsibility is a little bit higher, I feel. So, yeah, I try to make it very relaxed and very much in their, the ball's in their court. So when they ask me, "Well, is this what you want?" And I'm like, "Well, tell me what you think." I'm very much about, like, I don't want to be necessarily the boss. They do call me that. They're like, "Hey boss, this is what we're doing." But I very much want them to have a dialogue between myself and them, and talk about what they want to what we want as a business going forward.
Andrew and Blake, do you have anything?
I mean,
Yeah. So,
oh, no, you go ahead, Blake.
all right. So how long did you say that you've been working on this game for?
So 2017, it was originally, I was writing from a book. So there was a book called Making Games for HTML, which is funny because the majority of the book was in JavaScript. So I don't know why that ended up being the case, but it really should be just called How to Make Angry Birds and an RTS Game, because the first 4 chapters was about Angry Birds and the last 8 chapters was about how to make a RTS game in JavaScript. And what was interesting and how I found out about the book was this guy had apparently written the original Command and Conquer for the web. And so I was like, what? How? Especially back then. And so I started looking at it, and initially it was actually very faithful to the original 1995 game. And so I was like, okay, cool, let me buy the book. And then I think I probably read it like 3 times. Because even back then, I don't think I was familiar with JavaScript at that point. And so I had to, and of course I was out of uni by then, so it was all about me and learning it on my own. Unfortunately, though, there's about half a dozen bugs, some of them pretty bad, in the book. And one of them was really bad and crippling. It was rendered on the canvas in HTML, which means it's CPU rendered. And so as soon as you get to about 60, 70 units, it would drop from 60 frames to 30 frames. And I'm like, this is an RTS game. You probably need hundreds, if not thousands of units on screen at one time. And I'm like, okay, this is not feasible. So after writing, and I think at that stage it was around 10,000 lines of code, March 2020, which is an interesting month, I'm like, okay, scrap it and restart. So really the current code base is actually from March 2020.
Yeah. And do you have like any sort of rough idea of when you would want the game to sort of be done, or is it just sort of a when it gets there, it
Probably
gets there sort of deal? Right, lovely.
Yeah, I mean, I'm like I said, I've made a JavaScript version, and then one of my friends, about a year and a half later, said, "Oh, could you make a desktop version?" And initially, I said no, because I knew how long it was going to take me. But after a week of thinking about it, I was like, "Let's make a desktop version." And
So is that basically? So that's basically redoing the whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. I don't know. I think for that one, for C++, I had done a lot of C programming in my first degree, my computer science degree, but not a lot of C++, funny enough. And so I was looking for a fairly decent C++ project. I'm very much about learning through your own practices rather than going to, I mean, classes are also important, but to really bridge that gap and be industry ready, you have to practice your own craft. And look, I very much project that to my own students when I'm teaching. I've heard other tutors say the same thing. So yeah, I wanted to do it because C++ is kind of interesting. There's like the beginner stuff, which is mostly similar to other languages like Java and C, you've got your for loops, your arrays, your if statements and things like that. But when you get starting into the intermediate things, that's when things start to really get a bit more critical and different from other languages. So when you're dealing with memory management, pointers, smart pointers, which there's share pointers and weak pointers and things like that. And then there's the really advanced things where if you watch like YouTube videos, like conferences and things like that, there's all sorts of things going on. And even I sometimes struggle keeping up with that. But I would say for C++, if you have a good intermediate knowledge, you'll survive. And so through these projects, or this C++ version, which now most of the time my students now work on it, but over the last couple of years, I've been able to really get my head around it. Not only programming it, but I also teach it. You need a certain level of confidence to teach a programming language, because you'll get students coming up to you and say, I don't understand this. Can you explain it to me? And sometimes that can be a quick 5 minutes discussion, or I've literally had sometimes an hour and a half with one student. Sometimes I go, I don't understand 2D arrays. And I ask them, okay, what's an array? They don't know. I'm like, okay, let's go way back. What's a variable? And then we go through the whole process. If I'm capable of doing that. Of course, we're busy. We have to usually move around. But if things are quiet, I can do things like that. So like I said, if I can learn through the project, that's usually the first objective, is to learn from the project and build up my skill sets.
And in terms of using students, or as to work on the project, have you ever run into any issues with like the school? Because I remember hearing, Vlambeer, they're a very indie studio that's been around for a long time. They started as, I believe they were two college students, and they'd made a game together, and the school basically said, we own the game, and then like two of them dropped out and formed the company. Have you ever had any issues in terms of that kind of thing happen?
Not really. The only thing I was a little bit concerned about was, could we advertise on campus? Which we actually didn't end up doing anyway. But the other thing was, could we wear branded jumpers? And fortunately at my university, we don't have a dress code. So my student employees, they can wear wherever they want. I was a little bit more concerned for myself, because I'm not only am I a student there, but I'm also an employee myself. But when I start wearing the jumper, and people started to come up to me and say, "Oh, what are you working on?" and I tell them, but yeah, no one, not like other staff, been very encouraging about my endeavors. So yeah, so far so good.
Yeah, that's
Really
good to hear then.
Yeah.
Really fascinating things. I know what inspires these guys, and we've known each other, but I want to know. So, what are the games that you've sort of been inspired by? I'm not really an RTS guy, but I've had my few experiences with it. Like, what inspires you to make the type of games you make?
It's funny because you say that, because I initially, like, the very first game I ever made was an RPG. And so I spent quite a few years in that. So I think it was from 2006 to 2010 I worked on that. And then it became my honors project. I was able to talk my supervisor into making my game into my research project. And so I did that for a year, and then I didn't want to look at the code base ever again, and I haven't. Yeah, I mean, I'm not really quite sure. Like, I played a whole bunch of RTSs when I was younger. Warcraft, Starcraft, Command and Conquer, Total Annihilation, Age of Empires, and so yeah, when this like I said, this thing about Command and Conquer being on the web, and I am a little bit less so now, but back in the day, I was very much, reading about programming books. And so, yeah, when this one came along, if it's a game programming book, then I'm even more interested. And so, yeah, when I was starting to read about this, and yeah, I was really, really intrigued if I could build an RTS. I think it's also the challenge that really drives me. I think, look, I haven't made every genre of game, obviously, but RTS is bloody hard. Um, there's a video actually. I think it's Lewis Carroll, or Lewis Castle, one of the directors of Westwood, former Westwood, and he's got like a little 10-minute video about talking about how what was involved in making an RTS. And I think I'm going to paraphrase a little bit, but with RPGs and first-person shooters, it's still challenging. But with RTSs, you got to do challenging things times 100, because just the amount of things that you got to get on board. So, for instance, like if you've got to move a vehicle from one part of the map to the other, that's still kind of difficult. You've got to do pathfinding, and maps got to handle that, and it could dynamically change. But once you solve that problem, now you got to select 12 units or 25 units or 50 units and say, yep, do the same thing and do it perfectly well as you were just doing one thing. And I mean, one of the reasons why I think it's taken me such a long time is vehicles, for instance, was very difficult to actually code up. Because, for example, if you've got a pathfinding algorithm, and you've got to remember, these pathfinding algorithms are usually designed to say, yep, you want the shortest path, I'll give you the shortest path. But in games, that's not necessarily the case. You do want to have some flexibility. But the pathfinding algorithm doesn't know that. So when you say, okay, yep, you're going along this path, but then if you've got a vehicle in front of you, well, maybe just pause for a sec. But how do you tell the vehicle to pause for a second or pause for a minute? And then say, yep, okay, next time, now you're free to go. Because, I mean, we've got eyes, so we can visually see this. But in the game code, it doesn't have eyes. It's all mathematical. It's all coding. And so I must have iterated on that movement so many times, because single movement, multi-movement, combat movement of different types of vehicles, movement with vehicles in infantry that work at a different speed. I also do multiplayer. So how does that play all into the retrospect of all that? And so, yeah, it gets very challenging when you're trying to solve all these problems, and also keep that good frame rate up as well. Even today, it's still kind of difficult. And JavaScript is kind of interesting because it's also a single-threaded language. I mean, there are ways that you can get around it, but for the most part, my game loop is just one thread. And so I can't necessarily say, oh yeah, I've got 24 cores or whatever on my CPU. Doesn't really matter.
Speaking of RTSs and I think you said JavaScript?
Yeah.
Have you seen the Minecraft turned into an RTS?
No, but I'm not surprised.
It's very cool. It's very cool. I think you should have a look at that. It's very fascinating. And it's all done within Minecraft. So I think you load into a Minecraft world. You're playing usual Minecraft, and you just enter in a command, and it just goes into RTS mode, and it all pretty much functions the same way like an RTS would. I think it would be very cool for someone who'd love RTSs to dissect, and making stuff like that.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. Yeah, I know with one thing I came across in Minecraft is someone made a 6502 emulator, which, let me break that down a little bit. So 6502 is an assembly language, but it's the one that's used for like NES games, SNES games, Apple II, Commodore 64. And so someone made an emulator within Minecraft. And so you would see the registries get all moved around, and it's like, you can do almost anything in Minecraft.
You don't use a game engine, obviously. So what was your any reason in particular why you decided not to go with something that was already pre-built?
I think because I'm a little bit older, to be honest. When I started like game programming in 2006, I hadn't even heard of game engine. And in fact, I didn't even hear about a game engine until 2010. And the first one I came across was UDK, so Unreal Development Kit. So just before, a couple more years before Unreal Engine 4 came out. And so it was kind of natural for me to just to program. That's my background. And for me, I mean, game engines, I mean, we are still intending to add a Unreal Engine component to the RTS game. I might explain how we actually do that, but we're still very much in the early days of what we could do with that. But yeah, it was very much, I get more comfortable with programming things from scratch rather than using a game engine. In fact, when I'm using a game engine and I've got to go through tutorials or I've got to read up documentation, if you don't give me the answer in a few minutes, I get frustrated because I'm like, I just want to draw a circle on the screen, and I'm like, I could do this in 2 lines. And so if I think there was a few months ago, I was trying to do something with animations with Godot. And I went around for about 10-15 minutes just to get this 2D animation thing to work. And I know a lot of people praise it, my colleagues have praised it, but I just couldn't get to work. And I think at this stage, I get a lot more frustrated and my fuse is a lot more shorter. And so, yeah, I can't sit down now and just watch tutorials all day. I could back in the day, but now it's like, come on, just get on with it. Especially like with some YouTube videos, and they'll spend the next 2 or 3 minutes promoting themselves, and I'm like, no, come on, get on with it.
Yeah, if I had to get another tutorial where they're selling their course, like I'm just gonna click away. Like I don't want to spend $50 on your course. Just tell me how to do the thing that you told me you're going to tell me how to do.
Exactly.
It's interesting though, because I feel like there's definitely generational differences now I've seen in terms of game developers. So people like yourself who came from an era before game engines, I feel like it's interesting to see almost your frustration with the current tools because they aren't easy to use realistically. Like I even remember when I started learning game engines, it took me years before I was getting like character controllers working or controller input, being remappable. Like lots of basic things would say in games was really hard for me to get started. Whereas now, like I look at some kids. I remember I joined this Discord server, and there were kids as young as like 6 to 8 years old that were doing full C# Unity projects, multiplayer, like complex stuff. And it's funny when I look at it because I feel like I'm kind of in both worlds in terms of, I've used engines kind of in my younger years, and now I'm kind of leaning more and more towards frameworks and just certain languages and building tools up from there. Like they both have pros and cons. And I think it comes down to the main thing of like, what saves me more time? Like you were saying before, like trying to learn Godot and just get a simple animation, sometimes it can take you like several days. Whereas if you did it in JavaScript, it could be literal seconds if you were fast enough on the keyboard. But I wonder if that's going to, because we were saying earlier on, talking about, getting graduates into the industry. And I think the main thing, right, is getting younger juniors working with senior veterans. And I wonder if there's going to be a clash, or there already is a clash now with people who, know how to program in C++ and, build their own tools versus those who just know how to use Unity and C# in that narrow mindset. Like right now I'm doing a course in object-oriented programming. We're using C#. And I'm finding it fine because it's basically just C++ but easier because, garbage collection and all the other fun stuff. But there's other kids who have used C# in the Unity context and they're struggling because they're like, what do you mean we don't use mono-develop? Like, what does that even, and there's this gap in their knowledge that ends up making it more difficult for them to produce work. And I just wonder if anyone's opinion really on like, do we think that this transition is going to maybe cause a clash? Because my other concern, right, is like what happens in 50 years' time where all the veterans have gone away and there's, new people. Are we going to have people who just don't know how to program? I don't think that's the case because I feel like there'll be people like myself who will just learn the stuff. But I wonder if like more game designers and developers are going to be almost at the control of these bigger, tool chains like Unreal and Unity, and not go out on their own and make their own thing.
I definitely agree that it's important. I mean, I'm biased, obviously, and so yeah, try to learn I call it more the lower level aspects of programming versus the higher level. But I absolutely agree with you, and I would also say using Unreal's C++ is kind of in the same boat. And so I'm very happy actually that you're learning C++ outside of that context because there's just so much in Unreal um, when you're programming in C++. It's funny because you said you touched it for the first time in the last couple of weeks, and you get nervous about it because I also get nervous as well because I've crashed projects, and it's like, really? Like I just edit this one thing and then the whole engine collapses. That's not great. And again, that gets into my frustration, and it's like, well, okay, fine, I'll build it myself, just to be, to stroke my ego a little bit. But yeah, I do think there is a potential of that of having a little bit of a chasm, um, of having game designers and game developers, and then hardcore, I guess, programmers, and that gap is breaching a little bit. Um, I think though, like for example, on YouTube, there's quite a few YouTubers dedicating to low level coding. Um, I think it's also a good idea to understand a little bit of assembly code, especially if you're dealing with the low level coding, such as C and C++, Rust, because that's where a lot of the optimization also comes into play, especially given the recent few games that have come out. But yeah, I do think it is there, but I think at the moment it's pretty small. But who knows in the next 50 years?
It's funny you mentioned low level programming because, of course, like right now, everyone says, low level was C, C++, whatever else. But
Yeah.
I'll never forget there was an interview by the original developer of Roller Coaster Tycoon, Chris Sawyer, and he programmed that in assembly from scratch. And I remember there was an interview him saying like, yeah, I used assembly or like higher level programming languages like C. So it's almost like it's shifted now. We're going up more and more levels of abstraction in a way. And that's the thing where I wonder with like more junior people, I wonder if we're going to reach a point where like I think we are at that point really. It's like younger people to actually know proper C++ or assembly is going to be very, very rare.
I think assembly definitely. Fortunately, at my university, we do teach it actually in a games context, so that's really, really nice. But yeah, it's a dying thing. If you asked me to write some assembly code, I probably couldn't do it. I would struggle. But I think the more important thing is knowing how to read it and say, okay, well, this part maybe potentially could be going wrong or taking too much time on the frame. Then maybe throw it into an AI or something like that and say, okay, can we optimize the high level code, C++, and look, even Java and C# are still technically in that category. It's a little bit different because they're using virtual machines. But at the same token, if you're still writing bad code at the high level, the compiler is not necessarily going to save you, and you can still end up with slow, buggy, and for the game players, frustrating experiences.
Have you done much playtesting with the game? Like, obviously, the students and stuff have played it, but have you ever, like, gathered player feedback and kind of implemented anything?
Yes, I've had a couple of people play through it. I'm actually struggling probably with two things at the moment. Getting the gameplay balance right, and related to game difficulty. So it was interesting because I think one of you were talking about it's a little bit too easy, and I was actually playtesting it just today, just making sure that it was all working. And look, of course I'm a developer, so I know the tricks of how to play my own game, but I still felt it was quite easy. So I'm actually thinking if I get it in the next month or so, maybe putting a difficulty level of like easy, medium, and hard into the game, because one thing I think I am missing from my game is tension. It's just not there. And so, yeah, I was talking to a mate of mine a couple months ago, and he really said the same thing. And then the other thing also, see, I draw all the assets for the web version as well, but that takes a long time to get through all that. So he was saying on some of the levels, yeah, it's a little bit bare. And I'm like, yeah, I know, because I've got to draw them up.
How do you then go about like scaling difficulty? Because obviously, like I think of first person shooters where they usually just make one or two more enemies. They might buff the enemies and then debuff your weapons. Like when you do an RTS, what are you kind of changing to make it easier or harder?
So I literally just started to think about this today. So, but yeah, I thinking increasing hit power, more life to the opponent's side. But the other thing I'm also seeing is at the moment, all my enemies are essentially reacting. So the player goes through, they start to get their soldiers to shoot the enemy units, and then they react to that. But I'm more thinking there should be some times, especially in the later levels, where you should be surprised and saying, oh, okay, there's a rush of enemies coming through. And maybe on the difficulty, instead of getting maybe 10 units on the easy level, on the hard level, you get, I don't know, 30, 3 times as much with with the same amount of forces that you have. And so you've got to deal with that. I wanted actually to make it a little bit easier because I did live stream the game a few months ago, and I was like paranoid of getting a game over because I was like, well, the developer should not get a game over. They should know what they're doing. So I probably made it a little bit too easy. So I need to go back into it and make it a little bit harder. So when people actually go through it.
I feel like RTSs, they've gone into a niche. Like they were a very big thing in the 90s and then kind of fizzled out in the 2000s when 3D and all these other like genres that kind of cater more towards that came in. Like where do you go? Obviously you've played all these games in the past, but do you have any like go-to design methods, or you kind of while you're playing it, are you going, okay, I kind of want to feel more like a StarCraft, so I'll go play a bit of that to kind of see what they do differently compared to like Age of Empires, or like when you're playing, where do you draw your inspiration from?
Yeah, I think it's, yeah, when I am playing, I will get ideas. It's interesting that when I play now, I can see the game mechanics actually being played out. Um, and this is like what the designers I can kind of see it. So for instance, like when I grab a whole bunch of tanks, for instance, and I say, okay, go attack this one unit, the first one will go up, and then the second and third will spread out, and then the fourth or fifth will spread out, and it's kind of like a semicircle. And to me, that's like, okay, well, StarCraft does that. Because when I play StarCraft, I see them do exactly the same thing, and I'm like, okay, cool. I've kind of stumbled on the same thing. But yeah, there's a bit of, I would say, mixing going on. So playing the game, it does have a more of a aesthetically Command and Conquer feel to it. But for instance, like my buildings, which are quite large compared to the rest of the units, so there's a bit of an Age of Empires 2 feel to it. So yeah, it's a bit more of a blending. And then what I want to do, for example, with Unreal Engine, is I want to develop a bit of a hub world, a 3D hub world, where you play as the commander / operator of this RTS game. You go to your computer, click on a button, and it jumps you into the 2D version of the RTS. And so essentially, this, in Command and Conquer, you're taking on this persona of the commander, but they're faceless. That it's you as the player. Where in my game, I want the commander character to be actually a physical manifestation in the game, in a virtual world, which sounds a bit weird, but yeah, I want them to have established relationships. I want them to have this is their job, so they get a salary for it if they do well. And so yeah, so there's a bit of inspiration, but I also want to try to mix it up a little bit, because you're absolutely right. It has moved more into a niche category. And I do follow a few YouTube videos, like the one that comes to mind is Giant Grant Games, who does a lot of StarCraft content. And he's actually consulted with a few game studios who've made RTSs. And so he's done a few interesting videos where I've actually, taken some notes and said, okay, well, maybe I can avoid some of the pitfalls that modern RTSs go through. There's still lots I like to do. Like I said, I'm still, very much a one-man show when it comes to the logic and the design of these types of games. And so, yeah, and then I've got to implement it as well. So that also takes some time. So when I'm trying to go to more exotic features, they're usually towards the end. I'll just give one maybe quick example. So if you've got your selection square, you select the troops that you want to send, and then you would click on an enemy, which is normally done in RTS. But what I would like to do is you hold down maybe Control, and you select all the enemy forces, and then the game would actually say, okay, I'll just select the closest one and then attack that one, especially if they're moving around really, really fast. For instance, like in esports, you've got to be like, what are you doing? Like 300 or 400 APM actions per minute. Is there anything else that I can do to make that a little bit easier, especially if we got to that level, which is, as Blake is saying, when you get to, when you're going to finish this game, maybe when we get to that point, which is probably another few more years away. But what else? What does inspire for you guys for making your games?
Oh, Blake, you go ahead because yours is so wholesome and good. I think you should.
Yes, I've heard stories about your games.
Yes, well, back when I was quite young, I used to watch a TV show called Good Game. It was an Australian, gaming show. And I used to sit down every Tuesday night and watch that. And I remember them talking about, they did a special on Rockstar Games. And they talked about this game called Manhunt that was banned in Australia. And I just got very interested in what this Manhunt game was. And, the game came out, 22 years ago? It's still banned here. But that game has sort of, I've watched a lot of YouTube videos on it and all that sort of stuff. And that has just remained a very big inspiration point for my work. This game, I've done a lot of like horror stuff in the past. So there's a lot of different, inspirations and stuff like that. But I just feel like my personal favorite aesthetic for games and sort of setting has really always gone back to basically what Manhunt was. So I guess that game in particular has just always been a massive like inspiration on the things that I do.
Nice.
And then basically like the whole PS1 aesthetic in general has just, just been a massive, driving factor in my work. I sort of fell into that style by accident many years ago and had a game get sort of more popular than anything else I'd ever done up until that point. And I basically just, stayed doing that sort of thing.
That era to me is like my favorite because I tell my employees who are a lot younger than me, who were not even born then, and I was like, it was a fascinating time because that transition from 2D games into 3D games and the struggles that were going through. I still remember playing Mario 64 back in '96, and going to my cousin's house in the same year, booting up his PlayStation 1 and going, "Well, this has got video."
Yeah, no, there's a lot of very impressive PS1 games. Like, I think it's very interesting. We have seen such a big revival on that in the last couple of years as well. It's kind of died off a little bit now, but like especially through like 2020 and 21 through to 2022, I think we saw like a massive resurgence in like that art style like coming back. Like it's been around for, I don't know, maybe since 2017 we sort of started to see it sort of come back in like the indie space. But I feel like there's a lot of people sort of hitting their stride now as developers that grew up on that sort of stuff. Obviously we saw a lot of platformers in the the 2010s, and now I think we're sort of as a big bunch of like new game developers are coming up. We're seeing the inspirations from what they grew up on. So Yeah, I think my first console I owned myself was a PS1, even though I think the PS3 was probably out at that point. Um, but yeah, I think it's just something that's very dear to me and something that, will always remain a big inspiration on my work.
There's a guy that he's doing some YouTube videos. He's actually making a game engine for PS1, and he just did a plugin for Unity, so you can start making Unity games, and it will export to the PS1. So you can
Oh,
burn
wow.
the game onto a disc and then play it on the real console.
Bro, that's cool though.
That's
Like
awesome.
you got to do that, man. That's so.
Yeah.
You
That's
have to
so.
do it.
Like, okay, now I'm just sorry. Now you just got my brain going. It's like, okay, we'll get a PS1 console and then take it to PAX, and people will
Yeah.
freak out because they'll be like, "How is this running on a PS1?" And they can sell copies and be like, "Yeah, guys, I'm
Whoa.
Like you're
Yeah.
doing TGX next year, right?
yeah,
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, hopefully.
Do that. Absolutely do that.
Yeah,
That'd be
that's
so
awesome.
cool.
I was joking around with my colleagues in my software development job because we're all gamers. And the CEO got a pool table, and I was just joking around with him. And I said, "Can we just get rid of the pool table and just put a PS1 in the corner instead?" But then my other colleague said, "Yeah, but if we do that, we'll never get any work done."
That's interesting though, because you're talking before about like I'm just thinking about PS1 games in general and kind of the renaissance we've had now with indies. I think part of it has been the like PS1, although back in the day, you had to basically all hard code that, and you were all figuring out different rendering techniques and how to display texture and lighting. It's funny though, because I know Blake a few weeks ago we were talking about some of the issues we're having in Unity, and you basically just did what they did with the PS1 graphics. So instead of like using Unity's lighting system, you just faked it with a plane and was like, okay, here's the light source, or I'm changing by basically vertex painting the models. And so it's also interesting to see, like I was saying before, junior people, not knowing these techniques. It's actually funny where people are going back now to how did the PS1 and that kind of look so good. It wasn't so much they're using ray tracing for realistic graphics. They had these smoke and mirrors of how to make games look good. Like I love it when I see indie games using mirrors in the same method like the old games where they just duplicate everything, and then that's reflection. Where now I feel like it's almost unsustainable for anyone, whether you're indie, solo, or AAA, to do these modern techniques of making games just because of how expensive it is. So I love seeing people who are making things like RTS games, like you, Justin, and Blake, with the PS1 horror, where it's like these games, they're still fun to play and they have these really interesting mechanics, and in many ways it's fresh to them. Like there are people, like you were saying before, Justin, that just have never played these older games, and so for them it's like the first time they're experiencing that, which is also really interesting.
It's cool, but it's also quite challenging because, like I said, I work with students, and of course the typical age is generally under 25. And so when I say you're making an RTS, half of them will say, "What's that?" And then even for the ones who do, they're like, "Okay, how do you play it?" And it's interesting because I was playing the original Command and Conquer on Twitch a few months ago, and that game just puts you straight into it. There's no tutorial. There's no someone saying, "Oh, build a construction yard, then build a power plant, then select." And so I'm really trying to go through that process as well and go, okay, how can I get my players to jump in? Because I've seen some of them and they get a little bit confused, and I've tried to massage them a little bit. So, for example, if they don't click on my soldiers after about a minute, another text prompt will come up within game and say, actually, this is what you're supposed to do. But it's really, really difficult because I don't want to do like a tutorial level and say, oh, click here and click here, like they did in Warcraft 3, even though it's fun. But I'm really trying to avoid it. But it's very difficult to balance. And with the game genre that I'm dealing with, unless you're over 30, and probably a bit more than that, like my mate of mine, like he's about the same age as me, and when he played tested, I didn't have to teach him at all. He just knew what to do. But yeah, with some younger people, it's a lot more challenging because they're just not aware of this type of game genre. Even though it's fun and there's still a lot of people playing it, but it's definitely fallen out of the mainstream where a platformer or first-person shooter where it's like, yep, WSAD, mouse, great, I'm set up.
I remember playing a lot of Command and Conquer Generals when I was younger. It was pretty fun, and I think I was like 8 at the time, so I was like, oh, I've made these little soldiers, and I'd like often lose, but I do find them very fascinating. But you know, we talked a lot about RTS today. You know, if you were to like, and you said that, you know, part of why you want to do this because of the complexity, and it's kind of fun, right, for you to sort of do it. Are there any other genres that like excite you, or have you thought about that you want to like tackle?
Yes, absolutely. And it's great you bring this up because I think like a month or two ago, my wife came up to me and said, "Is this the only game that you're going to make?" Like she calls it the army game. She doesn't even call it an RTS. She just says, "Oh, it's the army game." Um, it's funny because she's Japanese, so she comes with her own background with that, and she actually does all the concept art for it. So because she's got like a calligraphy background, and so yeah, she does amazing work with that. But but she's getting more into what we're doing, and so she's come up to me and says, "Can we make it like a detective game?" And I said, sure, let's do that. And so I was just showing her some of the game footage from LA Noire, and about the whole doubt and lie and truth thing. And I said, look, we could potentially do something like that, because some of the work that I also do is with large language models, and generating text. And so I know how to code that up and put that into a game. And I said, oh, can we do something like that? So funny enough, I'm actually having a meeting with my team on Saturday, and I'm actually going to get one of my programmers to look into it. So, and in fact, she doesn't even know. So if she's watching, she just found out. Uh, but yeah, it's yeah, we're not solely focusing on RTS, even though it's a very big part of the business at the moment. But no, I definitely want to expand out. I don't want to be like NetherRealm, like making Mortal Kombat 12 times, even though I love the game. But I don't want to do that necessarily. We have another project that I'm also working on, Cards of Kanji. So it's a card game where you learn the kanji symbols through playing. And that project has also been rattling around in my head for a while. It's a much smaller project. But yeah, hopefully 6 months maybe. Let's put an actual date on it. And yeah, I like to get that out. So yeah, it'll be a multiplayer game and a single player game where you can just do some cards and you'll have the kanji symbols on it, and the values of the cards is based on the number of strokes. So the more complex kanjis are the higher cards. And so we'll have the symbol and the translation, and so you build up that rote memory. Because I said to my wife, I said, how do you learn this, when you were growing up? And she was like, we just did 12 years of it and repetitive ingrained knowledge. And I'm like, okay, maybe just repetitive gameplay might be a way to make that a little bit more fun, but also learning at the same time.
Oh, that's very cool. You have 3 different, very, very opposing, not opposing, but like very different kind of genres that you want to work on. I guess I'm always doing like sort of want to do the same thing, and I know some of us here do a few of the same things over and over again, but it's always exciting to sort of tackle a new genre, right? And explore some new things.
I also think, because I also do a lot of the tools as well. So I've got like a map editor, and there's some other tools that I've built, like how to split up the map into different small sections, how to do the collisions. So a lot of time also goes into that. But I had a colleague of mine who's actually designing her own game at the moment and just about to start production. But she was asking about, well, how can I keep my motivation through this and avoid burnout? And both myself and another seasoned colleague, we both said, just rotate on the tasks. Do some artwork one day, do coding the next day, do some design the next day, and just keep rotating it around and around and around like that. And it just keeps your brain fresh, in my opinion. Just keeps your brain fresh and thinking of new ideas. So by the time that you come back to, possibly where you were burnt out, you're not so much burnt out anymore. And so to me, that for what I've been doing for the last quite a few years seems to be quite successful. The only downside is it really slows down the project if you're just working on one, because you're kind of doing this time sharing round robin type process.
Burnout's a whole other discussion, which I feel like we didn't even resolve in the last episode. But look, I think that's most of the time we have. But there's so much more we could talk about, Justin. So I'd love to have you on for another future episode where we talk more about
Love to come back.
a bunch of stuff, because there's just so much design and especially when you start. I mean, so many different game ideas you just placed in my head now. I'm like, oh, there's so much more you could discuss in terms of the kanji and everything else. But before we head off, if you want to shout out anything where people can support you or check out your work or get in contact with you, anything like that, feel free to let us know, and we'll be sure to put in the description and all that stuff like that.
Yep. So I'm pretty much on all the social media platforms. That took a while to go through all that process. But probably the main place is tgame.dev, nice and short. And you can access the game. You can play the demo. It's completely free. And then we've got our social media links on that as well. So you can join our Discord server. Give me your feedback. If it crashes, let me know. I'll fix it up. In fact, I've even got a little bit of code where it does crash. It actually will send it to the web server and tell me what's gone wrong. It's all obfuscated, which is really hard to read, but anyway. But yes, so once again, tgame.dev is probably the main link to play the game and get in touch with us.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you for coming on, and thank you, my co-hosts Blake and Andrew, for being here. My support, my good questioners. But that's all for today's episode. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode. Bye now.
Bye.
Bye.
Good job, everyone.